Hello everybody, welcome to a new episode on my channel, The Dissenter, and my guest today is Dr. Todd Shackelford. He is a distinguished professor and chair of psychology at the University of Oakland in the US, as well as the co-director of the Evolutionary Psychology Lab there. He is the editor-in-chief of the academic journals Evolutionary Psychology and Evolutionary Psychological Science, and he is also a fellow of the American Psychological Association and the Association for Psychological Science, and also a very prolific author of very many articles and also edited books. So Dr. Shackelford, it's really a pleasure to have you, and thank you a lot for accepting the invitation.
It's my pleasure, Ricardo. I'm happy to be here.
Okay. So today I asked you to talk a little bit about family dynamics and family relationships from an evolutionary perspective, because I've been having quite a lot of evolutionary psychologists on the show, because in fact it's one of the disciplines I admire the most from all the sciences, and I haven't yet in fact talked with anyone about this topic in specific. So to start off with, why does it happen that in families, between couples, and even between other people that are related to the family, and even sometimes between the parents and their offspring, we have conflict? Is it because two different people do not really share 100% of their genes, and so in the end there's always a self-interest in the equation, because I mean I share 100% of my genes with myself, but not with anyone else, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a broad brushstroke, that's probably the most sort of parsimonious way to think about it, is that although family relationships are very intense and can be intensely cooperative, they are not, they're not perfectly cooperative, and indeed cannot be, at least if you use the guide of the percentage of genes or the proportion of genes that each member shares with another, because as you pointed out, even our children only share 50% of our genes with us as individuals. And so while family relationships can indeed be, warm and, engaging and incredibly supportive, they can also be terribly conflict-ridden.
Yes, exactly. But apart from the very specific view coming from genetics and the fact that we don't share 100% of our genes with other people, are there any other aspects that we have to take into the equation to understand why there might stem some conflict from family relationships?
Sure. I'm not sure this will take us fully outside of the realm of genetic interests, but I mean,
Sure.
between a husband or a man and his and a female partner, given that human males do invest in offspring, I mean, there is a persistent issue or potential problem of paternity uncertainty. So a man may be involved with a woman in a long-term relationship, presumably committed relationship, and he will invest in children that she produces, and that creates an adaptive problem for him, what we would call an adaptive problem, namely potentially investing in an offspring to whom he's genetically unrelated, unbeknownst to him. So a separate issue would be step-parenting. This would be he's investing in an offspring that was actually sired by a rival rather than by himself, and that creates tremendous conflict in romantic relationships or long-term committed relationships. Everything from, everyday conflict in terms of bickering to more intense conflict that can result in rape or murder. So, I mean, I would put paternity uncertainty up there as, a major area of conflict, which again doesn't, it's not divorced from the notion of genetic interests, but it's not quite the same sort of genetic interests as the degree of overlap shared between the two individuals.
Yeah, sure. I think that there's also another aspect to this, that is when two people get together, they usually are from different families originally. So apart from the fact that I might have children with that woman, for example, I also have my own family, my brothers, my sisters, my parents, and I might also be interested in allocating some resources to them as well, correct?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, you're quite right. I mean, the coming together of a particular couple is, of course, the coming together of two separate families. And it's also the case that families have extraordinary interests in, the mating decisions and reproductive decisions of the individual members of those families. And so families, particularly parents, can, become incredibly active in, they would call it supporting, or, from the children's perspective, it might be perceived as interfering. But families certainly have much to gain and much to lose from the mating and reproductive decisions of, their children and other members of their family.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I've already had another conversation with Dr. David Buss, and he also talks a lot about mating from an evolutionary perspective. So could you tell us a little bit more about the importance of the emotion of jealousy in a couple?
Sure. I mean, I think jealousy is a very intense and indeed a very powerful emotion that I think on balance, generates, a huge amount of conflict in a relationship. I mean, in particular, male sexual jealousy. That is men's, sort of concern about their partner's likely or possible involvement, sexual involvement with other men. I mean, there's very good evidence that, male sexual jealousy is if not the leading cause of intimate partner violence by men against their partners, as well as the killing of women by their male partners. We've also done quite a bit of work looking at the extent to which male sexual jealousy might contribute to sexual coercion and rape of intimate partners. And so it's really just it's a nasty emotion, but one that is produced by evolved machinery of the mind. It's evolved to motivate, or evolved to motivate our ancestors, our ancestral males, to avoid, the circumstance of cuckoldry, that is, investing in offspring sired by another male. And I mean, we can all agree that it has its moral downsides, but that's sort of beside the point in the currency of natural selection. I mean, our ancestors are not those men who were, just fine with their partner having sex with another man. They were super liberal and, very happy to have their partners, have sex with whoever they wanted to. I mean, our ancestors are those men who were not pleased and made it known that they were not pleased should their partner even look in the direction of another man.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very interesting. And another thing that I think is related to jealousy is the fact that when we feel jealousy toward another person, and particularly when she is part of our couple and we are in an intimate relationship with that person, it is also the case that we want to take some... Let me just reformulate. Okay, so because we feel jealousy, it also motivates us to deploy tactics in order to prevent that other person to perhaps end the relationship with us and go to another relationship, correct?
Absolutely. So, yeah, in my response before, I was focusing more on sort of if an infidelity were detected. But of course, a large part of jealousy is preventing any sort of, straying from the relationship, either on a short-term basis or attempting to end the relationship altogether. And so with David Buss, who was my graduate advisor, in fact, and many other colleagues of the last 25 or 30 years, we've done quite a bit of work on what we call mate retention. These are the things that men and women do explicitly, that is by their own reports, to keep their partner interested in them. And and also to keep their partner from becoming involved with anybody else. And so in these mate retention tactics, I should note that sexual jealousy is men don't have the market cornered on sexual or emotional jealousy. I mean, women also are quite capable of jealousy, and both men and women are quite capable and quite prolific at mate retention behaviors. Much of our work has been focused more on male sexual jealousy and male mate retention behavior, but certainly there is work on female mate retention and female jealousy. It just tends to be a little less florid and a little less devastating in terms of the outcome.
Mhm. Yes, that last part is very interesting because I also wanted to ask you. It sometimes gets related to tactics that involve physical abuse or verbal abuse, but violence in some form, right?
Absolutely. And that's particularly the case with regard to male sexual jealousy. Men's jealousy is far more likely to result in physical violence and murder than is the case with women's jealousy of their partners. Now, I will say, on the other hand, that women do kill their partners in jealous rages. Well, let me rephrase that. Women do kill their partners, but more often than not, the trigger for that murder is, in fact, the man's sexual jealousy. And so it's women defending themselves against a jealous husband, or alternatively, women defending their children against a jealous husband who might be attempting to use violence against the children as a means of punishing who he suspects is an unfaithful wife.
Yeah, exactly. That's very important. And another aspect, I think, is that in regards to infidelity, I mean, when a man or a woman is unfaithful to their partner, it doesn't always means that she or he is wants really to leave the relationship that they already have. Sometimes they are already in that relationship for a long time and they want to get a little bit outside of it just to check out what is their current value in the mating market and other things like that, right?
Yes, I think that's a very good way to summarize a lot of that. I mean, we know that, it's not quite so interesting, I think, perhaps from the male's perspective, because the greatest predictor of men's infidelity is just sheer opportunity. So just having an opportunity, that's all you need to explain men's infidelity. Women's infidelity, the best predictor seems to be, there's a lot of work on women's infidelity, but one of the best predictors is her dissatisfaction with her partner, her dissatisfaction with the relationship itself, which suggests the possibility that she may be testing sort of alternative partners. At the same time, we know that the men that women do select as extra pair partners while maintaining an ongoing relationship, these men have a particular set of non-arbitrary qualities, namely they're much more physically attractive than their long-term partners, they're sexier, they're better lovers, they're more likely to report experiencing an orgasm with an extra pair partner than with an in-pair partner. And so I think, people are quite capable, both men and women are quite capable of having a long-term relationship while also pursuing a short-term relationship. And the reasons for doing so might be somewhat different for men and women.
And they might be different because the optimized reproductive strategies for men and women differ, correct? So, for example, men produce sperm virtually throughout their entire lives and all the time, and they don't get pregnant, so they don't have to go through those painful 9 months of pregnancy and then also have the child with them to rear and things like that. So their optimized sexual strategy would be to try to impregnate as much women as they can, correct? But in the case of women, that's not the case, but they might want to keep their original relationship, but at the same time, try to obtain perhaps resources from other men as well.
Yeah, or keep the main. So from women's perspective, to keep the investing long-term relationship going, while also one way to think about it is the possibility of securing genes, better genes, good genes, genes that build attractiveness and sexiness, for example, to collect those genes from another man. And from men, I mean, I think you're right that there are sex-differentiated sort of strategies involved here. I mean, I would simply note that it isn't the case, I think, that men that their optimum strategy is to impregnate as many women as possible. I think that it's the relative costs and benefits that have to be considered. So for men, I mean, the relative costs involved in pursuing multiple partners are very small compared to the potential benefits, the reproductive benefits over evolutionary time that would have accrued to men who were pursuing these short-term relationships. And so all of which is meant to say that sometimes the best strategy for a man might be to be committed to a single woman and to maintain that monogamous relationship and to not pursue alternative short-term relationships, which might jeopardize his current long-term relationship should it be discovered.
Exactly. And now I want to put something on the table, and then I'm going to ask you to comment on it, because it seems to me, with the conversations that I've been having with biologists and psychologists and so on, that it is still kind of a mystery how monogamy might have evolved, not only in humans but in other species as well. But let's stick to humans now. Okay, so I'm going to put an hypothesis on the table, and then you can comment on it. That is, wouldn't monogamy bring benefits both to men and women in a different way? Because for men, if they know that that woman only provides sexual benefits, let's say, to them, and they are not having sex with other men, then they would be certain that the children that came from that woman would be 100% there. So that would alleviate, let's say, parental certainty. And in the case of women, I mean, they would have exclusive access to the resources of that man, and he wouldn't share them with any other woman. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. Shall I comment on that?
Sure.
So, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, in principle, it's a trade-off. It's an exchange of reproductive and sexual access for sustained resources. But the problem is that, it is possible and sometimes very alluring to renege on the deal. So sometimes both men and women are unfaithful. And they break the almost always explicit commitment. What I mean is, marriage is a human universal. It occurs in every culture with a variety of bells and whistles. But the thing is that there's really no guarantee that one's partner will never, sort of opt out of the agreement, even temporarily. And so this is why the emotion of jealousy evolved. I mean, in short. Because there's always the possibility, it is always possible that a partner, whether it's a male or a female, will, fail in that promise. And women, will pursue extra-pair sexual relationships, men will pursue extra-pair sexual relationships, and sometimes extra-pair long-term relationships, diverting resources that his partner expected to another woman and to another woman's child. And so while there is the expectation, of course, that this relationship is treated as monogamous. There's never a guarantee. So there's never a guarantee that men are 100% certain that their offspring are in fact their own offspring. Now, I mean, we do have DNA fingerprinting technology today, so we can do that. But the male mind didn't evolve in the context of access to such extraordinarily accurate paternity technology, paternity detecting technology. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess that recent paternity detection technology that we have nowadays is not really relevant from an evolutionary perspective, right?
Right. I mean, that's right. It's not relevant in terms of, it doesn't tell us anything about, the underlying evolved structure of the mind. And it doesn't help us to understand, why men would ever have been, concerned about paternity. I mean, of course, they need not be today, if a paternity test were sort of done on a regular basis. But then again, I can imagine that there will be men who wouldn't even believe the paternity results. So,
Yeah, and I guess that again regarding infidelity, I guess that because of our own self-interest, if we have an advantage, an additional advantage that is at hand, and we can do something about it, and we don't get punished for it, I guess that it is too tempting to try to avoid that, right?
do you mean with regard to the paternity testing technology, or do you mean?
No, no. I was talking about trying to gain further advantage by having additional partners.
Yeah, that's the thing is that there are benefits, ancestrally speaking. There statistically are benefits associated with the pursuit of infidelities. Yes, of course, there are also costs, but there are benefits. Even if those benefits, themselves come with costs, they are nevertheless benefits that can be incredibly alluring.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's now change a little bit the
Sure.
topic and talk about one of the big topics of your research, that is sperm competition.
Sure.
So, would you classify this as a mate retention tactic for men?
I think I would. I would argue that sperm competition, I would argue that sperm competition is basically the way to think at the broadest level about all of the conflict that's going on between the sexes, especially conflict between mated partners. Uh,
Just by the way, just for the audience, could you
yep.
please explain the concept of sperm competition before continuing?
Sure, sure. So sperm competition, generally speaking, refers to the competition between the sperm from different males for access to um, an egg or eggs. I mean, anytime a female mates multiply or is mated multiply, the sperm from those different males will compete for access to or the prize of the egg. This is part of what sperm are designed to do, is to compete effectively for fertilization. Now, with that backdrop in mind, I think that sperm competition theory, which was advanced probably most clearly by Jeffrey Parker in the late 60s and early 1970s, a biologist working with insects, I think that framework provides, a good way to sort of cast a wide net on a lot of the conflict that occurs between men and women, or between males and females, which includes human males and females, of course. And so a lot of our work, at least in the early part of my career, focused on, and still focused on, the extent to which sperm competition may have served as a selective force in human evolutionary history and in the production or creation of or design of the human mind. In particular, I've been very fascinated with male psychological adaptations that may have evolved in response to the adaptive problem of sperm competition. And so some of the work that we've done has documented, for example, that the longer that a couple spends apart from one another since they last had sex, it's actually the portion of time that the couple has spent apart, physically apart since they last had sex, predicts the male's interest in having sex with his partner, predicts his reports of her physical attractiveness, her sexual attractiveness. So it's specifically time spent apart, a proportion of time spent apart since they last had sex, not time since last sex. One thing would be, oh, well, maybe it's just been a long time since they had sex, but it's not time since last sex. In fact, it's not even time since last ejaculation. So we've actually controlled for time since last sex with that woman, time since last sex with any woman, and also time since last masturbation. And what we find is it's specifically the proportion of time that the couple has spent apart since they last had sex that predicts these various psychological outcomes for men, which is very difficult to account for other than recourse to sperm competition theory and trying to understand why this percentage of time spent apart or proportion of time spent apart should be so important. And again, we don't find the same effects for women. They're specific to men, and they are specific to time apart. I mean, the idea is that time apart is time that men can't account for where their partners have been or what they've done, and better to assume that she's had sex with another man than to assume that she hasn't. Now, when you ask men what they're thinking, they won't tell you anything remotely close to, well, I'm worried that she's had sex with another man and may contain sperm from a rival male. They'll just say, I don't know, she just looks particularly attractive right now. But of course, those findings are entirely consistent with the findings in dozens of studies of socially monogamous birds, for example. Male birds behave precisely the same way as male humans, and we don't require that male birds have sort of figured out that or consciously are able to articulate, if we had any way of even determining this, that their partners might contain sperm from rival male. Birds are just thinking probably what human males are thinking, which is, she looks particularly attractive.
Yeah, that in the one hand it seems funny, on the other hand it seems a bit creepy, let's say, at least for people who are not into it scientifically. But anyway, how do you study this specifically? I'm curious. Do you collect sperm samples from different men, and then in the lab you study exactly what? The volume, the sperm motility, or what exactly?
Sure. So the work that I just referred to, that was all conducted using self-reports and partner reports. So we just ask people, when is the last time you had sex? And then we ask them, how attractive do you find your partner right now? How much, when would you next like to have sex with your partner? And basically, that's how we got access to those data, the psychological data. On the other hand, in the last few years, we've since established and are actively running a human semen analysis lab where we actually do collect ejaculates. And we have several different projects running right now, one of which is at a very basic level designed to replicate the work in humans that was conducted by Robin Baker and Mark Bellis in the 1980s and 1990s, where we basically have, in our work, we have couples coming. These are couples who are involved in committed sexual relationships. They come into the lab 7 different times, and to make a long story short, they provide, or the couple provides 6 ejaculate samples. So 3 masturbatory samples and 3 copulatory samples. So we actually have them, they actually have sex, they bring the condom into the lab within 1 hour, or the male masturbates, brings the condom into the lab within 1 hour, and then we immediately analyze it, and it's actually stunningly simple to do this once you have the technology. I mean, we have what's called a semen quality analyzer. It's a laser. It runs by virtue of laser optics, and in 75 seconds, you get a report on 17 clinical parameters, from sperm motility, swimming speed, average swimming speed, straightness of swimming speed, sperm morphology. You get assessments of sperm concentration, and so now we're finally in a position to actually investigate some of the semen parameters and whether they, in fact, vary as a function of the risk of sperm competition. One of the classic findings in this area is that when there's a greater risk of sperm competition, males produce ejaculates that include a greater number of sperm, as if they're adjusting their ejaculate in response to the increased risk of competition. And Baker and Bellis have documented this in human samples with small samples over the past, again, back in the 1980s and 1990s. And this very finding has now been replicated in hundreds of different animals, probably most famously and repeatedly in birds, where male birds will ejaculate larger numbers of sperm where there's an absence from their regular partner. They seem to be presuming that, this can't be good. And so we're looking to see whether or not this replicates in humans. And And so we're sort of at the beginning of this process of human semen analysis. It took us a long time to sort of get to this point, and our institutional review board, required, I actually don't think it was unreasonable, but it took us the better part of about 18 months, almost 2 years, to get approval to do this kind of research. But we have it now, and so we're conducting a couple of different studies right now. One is with the couples, and where they come in 6 different times. We actually collect data on, so we have ejaculates from these couples. We also have, them, this is work conducted with one of my colleagues, Lisa Welling. She's an evolutionary behavioral endocrinologist. And so
I already had her on the show. So
okay, good. Yeah. Okay, great. So so we also have saliva samples from each one of these participants, and so we can investigate questions like, do men vary various parameters of their ejaculates as a function of their partner's ovulatory cycle status? Might men ejaculate greater numbers of sperm when their partners are at mid-cycle as opposed to when they're outside of the fertile window? And so we'll be in a position to answer these kinds of questions. So anyways, we're very excited about it, and we think it's really interesting and sort of pushes the envelope for the work that we've been doing anyways on sperm competition in humans.
Mm-hmm. Okay, very well, and I hope it all goes well for you in that endeavor. But now let's move on to another topic. Sure. Because we've been focusing a lot on couples, but now let's move on to parent-offspring conflict. So why does this happen in humans? Is it again because parents don't share all of their genes with their children, and because because that doesn't happen, they also differ psychologically, and so children and parents might have different interests and might want to pursue different things, and that's where the conflict stems from?
Well, I mean, I would say that that's an excellent summary of parent-offspring conflict theory, and I think that does basically capture in a broad brushstroke why the relationships between parents and offspring are not totally and utterly cooperative. In fact, they're often riddled with conflict, alongside extended periods of cooperation and generally speaking, tremendous cooperation. There is conflict, and it's often around the distribution of resources, particularly if there's the conflict can get exacerbated, for example, where there are multiple offspring, and so there you can see sort of the ground being readied for sibling conflict, as children, of course, value themselves more than do they value their siblings. From a genetic perspective, I share 100% of my genes with myself, but only 50% of my genes with my full sibling. And yet, from the parent's perspective, each child is a genetic vehicle for the same proportion of genes. And so, very often, parents, particularly mothers, spend a good portion of their time, encouraging siblings to get along better than they do. So yes, I think that is one way to think about sibling or to think about parent-offspring conflict, is that yes, there are shared genes, but they're not perfectly shared, and so that provides the breeding grounds for a tremendous amount of conflict, especially when families are in part sort of a mechanism by which resources are transferred from adults to children. I mean, there's a lot at stake.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I guess these are all very controversial topics, and people get very easily uneasy when they're talking about this, particularly if they do not do work in evolutionary psychology or are not familiar with the literature. So, but at a certain point you refer to sibling conflict, and that's another topic that I want to address with you. So again, siblings usually, unless they are twins don't share 100% of their genes. But I guess that there's another aspect to sibling conflict, that is, if the parents themselves do not invest equally across their offspring, then that might also provoke conflict between the siblings, right?
Absolutely. And even, I mean, right, I think one issue is parents not investing equally in their offspring, and I think there's very good evidence that parents do not invest equally in their offspring. They invest as a function of, and again, I don't think parents will deny this, but if you assess things like emotional support and liking and time and energy investment, parents do not invest equally in their offspring. I mean, as a parent, I will say that I do, but of course I'm deluded myself, but the bottom line is parents will invest differentially. But even if parents, if you talk with parents, they will invest, their investments will be perceived by siblings as differential, in part because, again, from any individual offspring's perspective, they are worth more to themselves than their sibling is to them. And so what any given offspring perceives as equitable, of course, will always be biased towards themselves. And so unless the investment is biased towards one sibling, according to that offspring's perception, it wouldn't be biased, it would be appropriate. It's a breeding ground for conflict because there are not identical interests on behalf of any one of those parties. And so, yeah, I mean, I think parent-offspring conflict and sibling conflict is a persistent, problem, a persistent difficulty. Notably, earlier in life, when offspring are particularly reliant on parental resources, but typically sibling conflict continues throughout life, although it can, decrease as, of course, the reliance on parental support usually decreases.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I guess that it is also very difficult for people to understand this and even to admit it when they see it happening. But another aspect to this is that the parents might also have something to gain, that is, they might also extract some value in terms of gaining more resources or things related to material gains or economic gains due to their offspring choices. For example, if they choose to mate with different people that have different social status, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, and that gets into the area of, parental attempts to influence or affect their children's mating decisions. Certainly a poor mate choice can be devastating from the parent's perspective because a poor mate choice can have cascading consequences on the reproduction of that is or isn't accomplished by the children. And so what you do find is that parents do tend to be more interested or at least more concerned about their daughters, their girls' mating behaviors and reproductive choices. But of course, that's, again, this isn't to morally justify it, but it's perfectly understandable from an evolutionary perspective because it's daughters' poor choices, just like a woman's poor choice in terms of a mate, is going to have potentially heavier negative reproductive consequences for that individual and therefore for that individual's parents, which is why you see cross-culturally parents being more suffocating, more interested in their daughter's sexual behavior than in their son's sexual behavior. So yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay, exactly. And now another thing that has to do with the relationship between parents and their offspring, but now it is a little bit more complicated because the offspring doesn't really come from those parents. And I'm talking about foster caring or foster parenting. So, and I guess that this gets very dark very quickly because, in fact, I guess that one of the things that comes from from the work you've done also with your wife, if I'm not mistaken,
Yes.
Viviana Wick Shackelford, you've
Yes.
studied foster parenting, and in foster families it occurs much easier that parents maltreat children, correct? That is, they are more violent more easily towards those children.
Yes, although I would use the terminology step parenting, step
Oh,
parents,
okay,
rather
okay,
than
okay,
foster parents.
okay.
Because I think that although the risk of neglect, abuse, and filicide, or the killing of a child, is higher among foster children than among genetic children, it's certainly higher still among stepchildren than among genetic children. Um, yes, and we've found this in multiple different samples using in several cases data sets that are 500,000 homicides, like the FBI homicide database, which includes several thousand, or certainly several hundred child killings. But yes, we've investigated and replicated some of Martin Daly and Margot Wilson's earlier work, showing that stepchildren are indeed more likely to be murdered than are genetic children. If you again, what you do is you look at the rates. You look at the number of stepchildren to the number of step families. Basically, you have to look at you're looking at rates, because of course, on balance, more genetic children are actually killed than are stepchildren. But then there are far more genetic children than there are children who are living with one genetic parent and one step parent. So, but the rate of homicide, of filicide, we call it filicide, the killing of a child by a parent, that rate is much higher for stepchildren than it is for genetic children. So the logic of the greater risk of filicide to stepchildren than to genetic children is that step parents, and typically stepfathers, simply do not have at a very basic level, don't share genes with that stepchild, and this offspring is a resource drain. It's a vehicle that's sort of using up resources with no reproductive or genetic payoff. And so again, it's nothing peculiar to humans. I mean, the killing of a previous of the offspring of a previous of a partner's rival occurs in other species as well. But we've actually, so we've done several studies, again, looking at nationwide statistics. Also, we've looked at the city of Chicago in particular, where they have much more information on any given homicide. And then we actually identified and got access to a data set of Chicago homicides that were committed between the years of 1870 and 1930. And we actually have the handwritten police files. And so we were able to show that, not surprisingly, there again, stepchildren are at greater risk than our genetic children. And we weren't surprised, but then one of the arguments is that, well, maybe that's just something peculiar to the modern world. I'm not sure how that would work, but at any rate, that clearly documents that it's not something peculiar to, world in the, in the late 1900s, early 2000s. The same pattern of findings turns up in 1870 Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and okay, so does all types of neglect and abuse that we can consider occur with a much higher incidence in foster parents than in parents?
Yes. So you mean in step parents? Again, I would say step.
Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah, the answer is yes. I mean, the staggering weight of the evidence indicates that stepchildren are at much higher risk of neglect, abuse, and murder than our genetic children. I mean, there have been a couple of reports where they've found that the rates are about equal, but I think, again, the weight of the evidence suggests that there is a risk, an increased risk to stepchildren of neglect, abuse, and and murder. I mean, another area I just want to mention that we've also done work on, also inspired by the work by Daley and Wilson, is on the method of killing. And so if you look in more detail at how children are killed, what we find and what they found, we found in different and new and larger data sets, is that step-parents are much more likely to, when they do kill their children, to kill them with methods that we and Daley and Wilson have argued reflect, well, at a minimum, a dislike of the child, even a rage or an anger at the child. So, for example, step-parents are much more likely to kill their children by bludgeoning them to death, by committing what's often referred to as overkill, where you beat them, to death, and then oftentimes way beyond what was actually necessary to kill them. Whereas when genetic parents kill their children, and they do kill them, it's more often by means that arguably, but I think it's a weak arguably, produce a quicker death and a less painful death. So a single gunshot to the head, for example, or a single stab wound to the heart. Whereas if a stabbing occurs with a stepchild, it's 113 stabs, all over the legs and the arms, and again, this doesn't prove anything, but it suggests that there might be something psychologically different when step-parents kill a child than when genetic parents kill a child.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, and let's just talk a little bit about religious indoctrination of children, because that's another way in which parents try to influence their children because they want for their children to have their interests aligned with them, I think. So, what did you study about that, about the transmission of religiosity between generations? Does it occur completely in, let's say, developmental way that these children are exposed to their parents' religion and so they incorporate it, or does it also have any sort of genetic component to it?
Well, that's a great question. And, I sort of confess that this is not an area that I've done a significant amount of work in, although in the last few years, we've had a couple of graduate students who have been really interested in this. And one of the things that we wanted to do, we got very frustrated. We looked at the literature. We wanted to look at how is it that parents do influence their children's religiosity. Well, we presume they do, and I think there's good evidence that they do. And yet, the data that had been accumulated up to a few years ago had really turned on asking children to respond, adult children to respond, to what extent did your parents influence your religiosity? And it was a very surface, sort of not very deep sort of assessment of this. And furthermore, it was just sort of, did your parents influence you? Yes or no? And we wanted to know, okay, but how? What are the ways in which parents attempt to influence their child's religiosity? And so we developed sort of a psychometrically sound measure of parents' attempts to inculcate religious beliefs in their children. And we've recently published that in Personality and Individual Differences. But in the context of developing that measure, we quickly discovered that it's not, of course, just parents who are influencing their children. And in fact, all the evidence in areas other than religiosity suggests that parents have actually very little impact on how their kids turn out. And so, in fact, it's peers more often than it's parents. And so we then asked, this is over several years, I'm trying to summarize several different studies. We then asked the same sample of participants, not identically the same, but from the same population, did your peers have any impact on your religious beliefs? And of course they did, according to our participants. And so we had originally hoped to develop a single instrument that assessed parental influence on religiosity and peer influence on religiosity. But as it turned out, they were too different. The things that peers did and the things that parents did, perhaps with 20/20 hindsight, were different. I mean, these are different types of relationships with different sort of power dynamics, and we quickly found that we needed to develop a separate inventory for how peers influenced a child's or a teenager's or an adult's religiosity. And so we're just at the beginning of this line of work. We've established these, psychometrically sound ways of assessing, and each one of these measures includes, several dozen items, specific instances in which a parent attempts to influence a child's religiosity, or specific instances in which a peer attempts or attempted to influence an individual's religiosity. And then we've sort of factor analyzed those and identified several factors of influence. All of which, again, just sort of bring this back to the original question, it was to assess whether and how parents, influence their kids' religiosity. And we, again, became quickly frustrated with how little was being asked about how this was occurring. And so we sort of just tried to get it back down to ground zero. And so, again, our measure itself is not, it's not tied to an evolutionary perspective. It's simply our attempt to develop a way to assess how parents do just this. That is, inculcate religion in children, or how peers do this. But it's a very interesting line of work that I think, well, of course I would think this, having been involved in this research, but I think it's a very interesting line of work that I think this is an area that, that shouldn't just be glossed over with a single question. Did your parents influence your religious beliefs? So.
Mm-hmm. Yes, but I guess that at least for the time being, we can't really conclude that because someone is religious, that stemmed simply from the fact that their parents tried to inculcate religiosity into them, correct?
Absolutely. Although, you're absolutely right. Although I also will note that, we know that religiosity, the intensity of religiosity, is in fact heritable. So there is a significant heritable component to religiosity. Now, the specific details, of course, of the religiosity, of the religion, are culturally inculcated. But the sort of, the intensity of belief, regardless of the specifics of the belief, does in fact have a significant heritable component.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's end now, but before that, just one last question, and I think that it is a bit tricky, but I want to ask you for your opinion anyway. That is, so we've been talking about family dynamics here. And when we talk about that in evolutionary psychology and other areas, biology also, we have this term kin selection that refers to the fact that because we share a certain percentage of our genes with family members, that we would also take into account their interests and their survival and their reproductive strategies and all of those things, and we would be interested in their success as well. But then there's another term that is not particularly related to families, that is reciprocal altruism, that is the way we establish, let's say, friendship relationships more or less with other people that are not really part of our family, but we can have a lot to gain with that because they cooperate with us and they help us solve some problems and things like that. But what I want to ask you about this is, do we already know if there's some relationship emotionally between kin selection and reciprocal altruism? Because I've heard from some people that I guess are not particularly into evolutionary psychology that one of the hypotheses they put on the table is that we originally evolutionarily developed kin selection, and then the emotions that we had to develop in order to establish friendships with people that were not part of our families directly stemmed from kin selection. Does that make any sense? Do we know something about that?
Yeah, so you mean, for example, if you mean like our feelings of loyalty or friendship or belongingness in, for example, a nation or in a particular religion, if those might be instances in which a kin-selected evolved psychology is being parasitized or being taken advantage of by the nation, for example. Is that what you mean?
Not exactly. I was trying to ask you if we already know something about how the emotions that we developed in order to establish relationships with our family members,
Yes.
then over time gave rise to other emotions that we use in order to establish friendships through reciprocal altruism.
That seems utterly possible to me, and even quite likely. Yes, there are evolved psychology that may have evolved originally for, you know, for interactions within a family. Those then could have been manipulated and sort of taken advantage of, or could have been used in the context of relationships with friends. But we could even just say, okay, with regard to reciprocal altruism, evolved machinery that exists to solve various problems of reciprocal altruism, that machinery, which produces a certain set of emotions, could have been exapted, as Stephen Jay Gould would say, to relationships with not just friends, but with countrymen or women, or with larger groups, sort of again taking advantage of, or building on top of a psychology that originally was designed to promote close, intimate friendships, for example. So yes, that seems entirely plausible. And do we know anything? I think we do. I think there are people who are working on issues of in-group and out-group loyalty, and the extent to which there is, in fact, the manipulation of, for example, the manipulation of kinship terms to promote particular bonds or promote particular groups. And that, that manipulation can be in the service of good and morally laudable actions, and it can be for, evil and nefarious purposes. Yeah, I mean, there's no, but it's the same basic sort of evolved machinery, would seem.
Mhm. Yes, I guess that I wanted to ask you that because sometimes it seems a bit tricky, because from an evolutionary perspective, we of course are a social species. And it seems that the relationships we had to establish evolutionarily with our family members with whom we have some sort of genetic relatedness, and on the other hand, with people with whom we didn't share genes at all, let's say friends and other people of our groups, through reciprocal altruism, might have developed more or less at the same time, because I mean,
Yes.
we always lived in groups, right?
Yes.
More or less.
Yes. I mean, all the evidence suggests that we've lived in groups. For much of our ancestral history, not groups of millions, but groups of
Sure.
dozens. Yes, and so I think you can have both of these processes operating simultaneously, kin selection and reciprocal altruism. Yes.
Okay, so Dr. Shackelford, I don't want to take any more of your time today. You've already been very generous with me. So just before we go, would you like perhaps to share with people where they can follow your work on the internet?
Sure. Probably the best place to find my work is at my lab's website, which is self-aggrandizingly called www.toddkshackelford.com.
Mm-hmm. You also have a Twitter handle or not?
I mean, I do, but I'm not very active on social media. So the best place would be to go to our lab website, where I try to make sure all of our current research is available there, and you can find out more about our many talented undergraduate and graduate students who really make things work to the extent that they do in the lab.
Okay, very well. So I will be leaving all of that in the description box of this video, and so the audience, please go check it out, because it is very interesting, this work, and we've only talked about perhaps 1/10 of all of it here today. So anyway, Dr. Shackelford, it was really nice to talk with you and meet you. I've been a big fan for some time, so again, thank you a lot for taking the time to come on the show.
Thank you very much, Ricardo. It has been my pleasure.
Hi guys, thank you so much for watching this video until the end. I would also like to ask you to please pay a visit to my Patreon page and see if you can make a pledge there. I would really be thankful for that. And finally, I would also like to give a huge thank you to my patrons Karen Litzke, Anne Blanche, Per Helga Larsen, Lau Guerrero, Chantal Gelinas and Jim Frank. Thank you a lot for all.